The public presidency, in the way we understand it today, is really a creation of the 20th century, or at least a creation of the very late 1890s. The president who brought the media into his world for the first time in a significant way was William McKinley. So he invited them to come into the executive mansion and have a workspace on the second floor. It was also McKinley who gave us the forerunner of the press secretary. His personal assistants would meet with the press a couple of times a day, midday around lunchtime, and again later in the day towards 4. If William McKinley started the presidential media relationship in a significant way, Teddy Roosevelt took it to another level. Well, Roosevelt brought reporters into his personal world, and he would often talk to his favorite reporters while he was getting shaved. One of the funny stories about Roosevelt is that he had the so-called Ananias Club. The Ananias name comes from the New Testament. It was about a guy who lied before God and was struck dead. Teddy Roosevelt would do the same to any reporter who gave him negative coverage, and you would be Ananiased right out of the White House. One man who was paying attention to how Roosevelt did it was Woodrow Wilson. Wilson became the president after the election of 1912, and he was there through World War I. Wilson was also significant in changing the way the presidency was involved with the media. He used the speaking tour to great effect, and he's actually the president who brought the State of the Union back to being a report orally delivered by the president. No one had done that since John Adams. Now, Wilson was also the first president to really significantly use the press conference, and not just by inviting his favorite members of the press in, but actually holding press conferences opening to all comers. The first one had about 100 people. The second one was about twice the size of the first one. In time, though, Wilson was disillusioned with how the media erroneously reported him. The press and president tend to usually grow apart in time. By the 1920s, radio was on the scene. Calvin Coolidge was the first president to significantly have the ability to use the radio. As a matter of fact, he spoke to the nation at one point, and something like 20-some million people heard him speak at once. That was more than the inaugural address of every previous president combined. Now, the president who took multimedia to a new level was Franklin D. Roosevelt. Not only did he have the radio and use it to great effect to speak directly to the American people in a time of crisis, the economic downturn of the Great Depression, and eventually World War II, Roosevelt is also the president who created the White House press office. In the West Wing is the Oval Office, and many of the offices nearby consist of White House communications personnel. And not too far is where the old White House swimming pool used to be. They covered over the swimming pool, and now that is the area where the press meets. And now it's a different kind of pool, the press pool. Presidential press conferences have always been rather controlled. Certainly FDR controlled his. Even today they're very choreographed. A lot of times they include practice run-throughs, questions that are known in advance before the president fields them in a live press conference. JFK was actually the first president to televise press conferences. Makes sense, he looked good on camera, he was young and vibrant. The next major innovation was probably the 1969 creation by Richard Nixon of the White House Office of Communications. While the White House press office is more reactive in nature, dealing with stories as they pop up and fires that have to be put out, the Office of Communications is proactive. The job is coordination. They have to deal with all the different agencies in the executive department that are trying to communicate a consistent message in a number of different avenues. You have the public liaison dealing with interest groups. In Obama's administration, the public liaison is called, I believe, the Office of Public Engagement. There's media affairs. There's political affairs, so the president can communicate clearly his agenda to his own party. And public affairs, dealing with officers across the executive branch. Speechwriters have also been a big part of the 20th century efforts of the president to get out in front of what the public is thinking. Through the 70s and 80s, it was common for speechwriters to not even really communicate with the president. They would just write the words and maybe barely even meet the individual speaking them. After network television changed everything, we moved into the 1990s, and then the age of the internet and cable news has changed the dynamic between the president and the people so much, but there's a lot more avenues now for the president to communicate to the public.